Murphy Brothers Contracting presents 15 Minutes with our preceding our main event. Great information to help you with your business and succeed. However, no credit given. Before I introduce our speaker, just a reminder: you're all on mute, and we'll be there on mute. There'll be a brief Q&A session following the 15 Minutes with presentation. So please add your questions into the Zoom chat box, and I'll do the asking on your behalf. So our 15 Minutes with presentation is entitled, How Much Money Are You Allowing Your Clients to Leave on the Table? And before I introduce the presenter, I'd like to say that we do work with this individual as a consultant for our firm, and I can't tell you how much money I've seen left on the table now before he came along. So I think that you really want to take heed to some of the things that he says right here and consider him using his services in your service as well. So this is going to be presented by the CEO of EarthKind Energy Consulting, and as I call him, my Paul Schaefer, for all you Letterman fans, you know what I'm talking about, on these monthly webinar presentations. So here, with how much money are you allowing your clients to leave on the table, Mr. Ron Kamen.
Thanks so much, Michael. It's a pleasure, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to hear this presentation about how much money are you allowing your client to leave on the table. And over the next little bit, we're going to go through all the different ways that people have been leaving money on the table and what you can do to help your clients get some additional incentives out of the projects you're doing. So without further ado, first, me. So why should you even bother listening to me? Well, my name is Ron Kamen, as Michael said, and I've got about over 3 decades of experience doing clean energy projects and programs and policy. I was actually the president of the New York Solar Energy Industries Association. I'm now president emeritus, and I was at one point the New York State Solar Champion for the state. I've worked with a number of clients to get them to be EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, green power leaders, got them to get a host of various different recognition from the United States government. For those of you that are with the Business Council of Westchester, I ran a clean energy series this past year on solar heat pumps, electric vehicles, and environmentally responsible investments. And then I'm also a chapter director for an organization called E2, or the Environmental Entrepreneurs, which are 10,000 of the country's leading entrepreneurs that focus in on a better environment that it also leads to a stronger economy, because it's not either or, they actually go very much hand in hand. Over the past number of years, I've worked with a lot of different clients, saved a pile of money on energy savings, millions of tons of CO2s, gotten them a lot of different incentives. You may recognize some of these names from just your travels. I've worked with everybody in the government sector, from authorities and municipalities, various different government agencies, through the private sector and nonprofits in particular, lots of colleges, universities, both public and private, as well as health organizations, and then for-profit companies as well, everyone from some of the larger ones that you'll recognize through some local ones, and of course, my favorite client, Murphy Brothers Contracting. Well, one of my favorites anyway. All right, just to give you a sense of what some people have said about me, for those of you that know Marsha Gordon, she was very kind to have a little video testimonial on my website and said some really sweet and wonderful things. This is Chad Ciafrani, who's the Oakwood Friends School, head of school, and he was a funny case because he thought I was crazy when I first came to him and said that he could actually get solar for 100% of his facility when they had looked at solar multiple times, couldn't figure out how to do it. They had 11 meters and 20 buildings and they couldn't figure out how to do it, but they actually wound up doing it, no cash out, saved them a pile of money, and to this day they're saving enough money to hire a new teacher every year. And this is the statement of the former executive director of the New York State Bridge Authority, who I've had as a client for the last 5 or 6 years, and I've worked with them extensively on solar and electric vehicles, and currently now on heating and cooling as well to meet the state's goals. And we'll talk about those goals in just a moment. All right, so you may have heard of this legislation called the New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA. And basically what this does is it puts the state mandated by law on a pathway to achieve carbon neutrality. And that's a reduction over 1990 levels down to 85%. Plus there's efficiency. So that's what's going to take us all the way. And it also leads to 100% emission-free zero carbon electricity by 2040 with an interim goal of 70% renewables by 2030. When you take a look, what does this mean in terms of these goals and greenhouse gases and everything else? And what you first recognize is that when we take a look at greenhouse gases and the impacts on climate, almost 90% of the impact on climate from greenhouse gases comes from energy. And in New York State, 20% of the greenhouse gases come from electricity, 32% come from heating and cooling or building, the thermal load, and then over a third, 34%, comes from transportation. Now, those of you may not care so much about greenhouse gases, although I don't know who that could be, especially after this last week again, where we see yet another climate interruption to our lives. What we can also notice is that it's dollars. And there's almost a one-to-one correspondence between greenhouse gases and the amount of greenhouse gases we're producing and the amount of money that we're spending. So what I always urge my clients to do is take a look at what you're currently spending on energy, on electricity, on heating and cooling, and on transportation. Realize that those are direct dollars that you're spending that are also having an impact on the environment, and recognize that there's a way of having an impact to reduce your cost and have a positive environmental impact, or go clean and save green, as we like to say at EarthKind. So today, with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, what we see is that there are incentives. And there's a lot of New York State incentives, in particular in the form of grants. For solar, there's $1.5 billion worth of incentives. For clean heating and cooling, $680 million worth of incentives. And for clean transportation, electric vehicles and charging stations, over $650 million as well. On top of that, there are tax credits that are available. There are low interest financing that's available. There's energy as a service, where in many of these instances, you can lay no money out and just pay for energy over time, just like you pay right now for your electricity, heating, cooling, or transportation, but save money, pay less with energy as a service. And we can talk about that some more later in the Q&A. If you don't take these incentives today, what we're seeing in New York City and what we're going to see elsewise around the state very shortly with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act are penalties. In New York City, it's called Local Law 97, and basically puts a limit on carbon emissions per square foot for anybody that has over 25,000 square feet today. Those penalties wind up being in the neighborhood of 50 cents per square foot. And I have one New York City client that is looking at penalties starting in 2024 of $1.2 million a year. And that just continues to escalate as you get further along into the law and into the dates, as there's basically step up penalties as you don't hit those goals. All right, so let's just look at solar for a second. So for those of you who have seen now, people are finally catching on. Solar is getting there, and fascinating thing, because we've been promoting this for a while, but when you take a look at the solar incentives, just since last year, since January of 2020, we started out with solar incentives at 60 cents a watt. And the way the state has structured this is that you fill up these blocks. That's what those are right there. And as you fill up the blocks, you then move to the next block, and the next block has a decreased incentive. So in January of 2020, it was 60 cents a watt. In May of 2020, that block filled, it went to 50 cents a watt. In November of 2020, that block filled, went to 40 cents a watt. In August of this year now, that block filled at 30 cents a watt. And now we are down to 20 cents a watt. And when this block fills, we're going to be having another decrease as well. So as you look around the county and as you look around everybody that's doing solar, what you should recognize is that they've been doing it. They're getting incentives today. Those incentives are decreasing. So every day that you delay means that you'll have less cash up front to pay for your projects. And again, just since January of 2020, we see a 2/3 reduction from 60 cents a watt down to 20 cents a watt. So if you're thinking about doing this, if you have property where you could put solar, now is the time to do it. When we take a look at who is doing this, boy, you know, there's 2 gigawatts, or about the same amount of capacity as the Indian Point nuclear power plant that has gone solar already. There's double that basically in the queue of people who are lining up to do it. And folks are doing it on rooftops, as we all know, but they're also doing it on ground in various different places. And they're doing it in parking lots, over parking lots as carports. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that that we'll talk about in a moment. So your options, there's build, own, and operate, which is the way that most people think about it. Oh, well, I have to put up the money. When I put up the money, I'll have to own it and operate it. And yeah, that's actually a great way to do it. If you have the capital, can take the tax incentives, it winds up being an outstanding return on your investment. And taking a look at a 20 or 25-year revenue stream, you always make the most amount of money if you're building, owning, and operating your own solar system. But if for whatever reason you don't want to do that, can't take the tax benefits, there's something called a power purchase agreement or an operating lease where third parties will put up the capital, they'll install the solar, they'll take all the tax benefits, and you'll pay an agreed upon rate that's substantially less than what you pay the utility. So there's a way of saving money with a power purchase agreement or an operating lease. And it's a great opportunity if you don't have a tax appetite, if you're a nonprofit, or if you're a government entity, or for whatever reason, you can't take the tax benefits. And then last but not least now, what has come, and this is going to be disappearing very soon, is the ability that if you have about 20,000 square feet or more, or have 100 parking spaces, you can actually have a third party come in, they'll put in all the solar, all the capital, you don't have anything to do with the energy, so you don't have to deal with the energy at all, you don't have to take the energy, you don't have to have any opportunity with the energy, but they'll just pay you a lease. And now you have your roof that becomes a revenue generating source as opposed to just an expense, or your parking lot, which not only then becomes a revenue generator, but also now you've got covered parking, which a lot of people find is a real benefit. These rules and laws and opportunities are changing though, because as the incentives are dropping and the rules are changing, it's getting harder and harder to do these types of deals. So we're going to start seeing these community solar leases starting to disappear. A lot of people have gotten in, and that's great. You're going to see some folks who've been grandparented now, but if you're thinking about doing this, it's a really good time and you should do it sooner than later. All right, one other thing too, if you do need a new roof, I did a project with Macy's in Staten Island and found out that Macy's across the country, what they do is they never pay for a roof anymore. They always build a roof into a solar project. And by doing that, what they do is they use that whole piece to finance all their roof replacements across the country. They wind up doing it either with third-party financing or using the solar federal tax credits and bonus depreciation. And they figure out ways of making it happen so that they can basically have a roof replacement built in if that's going to be something they need to do over a few years. And one of the things that you can do as well is if you need a new roof, it's a good time. If you're going to need a new roof in, let's say, 10 years, you can structure that into a project so that you can have the solar come off, the roof go on, the new roof go on, and then put the solar back. And you could structure a deal. I've seen it done. Macy's does it all the time, where they build that into the project costs and into the savings of the project. All right, so that's solar electricity, which is available to most folks. Let's talk about heating. So heat pumps. So everybody has a heat pump, and most folks know, but your refrigerator and your freezer is a heat pump, compresses and expands a substance to basically get rid of the heat that's inside the box and dump it out in a refrigerator and freezer's case into the coils and back. But an air conditioner is also a heat pump, and it does the same thing, whether or not that's a unit air conditioner or a central air conditioner. Basically compresses and expands, takes the heat out of a space, dumps it, and rejects it outside. The heat pumps are basically, an air source heat pump is really just a two-way air conditioner. It does air conditioning during the summer, but during the winter, it reverses that same process and puts heat into your space. And heat pumps have now come a long way. So even down to -15, you could have a cold climate air source heat pump that provides heat very cost effectively at efficiencies that are dramatically better than fossil fuels. And when you take a look at fossil fuels, what you have to recognize is that any fossil fuel always has an efficiency of less than 100%. So even the most efficient gas furnace has an efficiencies, let's say in the 99 percentile, but that's it. Always less than 100. When you take a look at air source heat pumps, you're looking at efficiencies of 200 to 300% because you're taking energy out of the air, even when it's really hot or really cold. You're taking energy out of the air and then using these heat pumps, and every unit of energy, electricity you put in, you're getting 2 to 3 units of heating and cooling out of these systems. So much more efficient than any fossil fuel source. And obviously, when you have a gas moratorium and you can't get natural gas, air source heat pumps are a really, really good option. Who has air source heat pumps? Oh my goodness, the Murphy brothers and the Mamarin XL storage system. Even though it's been a little bit underwater, still air source heat pumps with solar on the roof as well. St. Bartholomew's, and there's lots and lots of examples of these. And one of the things that you should know that a number of people that I got brought into found out too late is that two things. If you just specify a heat pump, an air source heat pump, if it's not a cold climate air source heat pump on the list that qualifies for the incentives, I had one client that lost $250,000. And all they needed to do was to switch the spec. It was basically the same unit, very little difference in terms of capital costs, but that cost them a lot of money and incentives that they left on the table. And that's something you really don't want to do. You want to make sure that you have a cold climate air source heat pump that's on the list that qualifies for Con Ed incentives. The next level of heat pump, which takes you from an efficiency of 200 or 300% up to 400 and 500%, because it takes the energy out of the earth. For billions of years, about half the energy that comes from the sun has been absorbed by the earth. It is a huge battery that's down there. And as you know, if you dig a hole and you go down 4 or 5 feet, it's a constant temperature. In this part of the world, it's about 50, 55 degrees. So what do we do with a geothermal or a ground source heat pump? Most people are familiar with horizontal fields. So you dig a series of trenches and you put pipes out and back. And that's what a lot of people think is geothermal. But nowadays, the technology has evolved. So even if you don't have a lot of space and you don't have a field, or you don't have a long driveway, or you don't have any other place to put out a long series of trench, all you do is drill straight down. And by drilling straight down, what happens is that you're doing the same thing you do with a field. You're capturing that energy of the earth. You send the fluid down. And one of the other things that has evolved over the years is that it's now closed loop technology. So what that means is you send the fluid down. It's the same fluid that comes back. You don't have to worry about, in the old days, they would take out water and then have to filter it and then put it back into the aquifer. Now it's just a closed loop. It just circulates. And as it circulates, it grabs that energy of the earth, that constant 50 or 55 degrees temperature. And if you're cooling with it, you don't have to do much more. If you're heating with it, you're just bumping it up from 50 or 55 degrees with your heat pump. And now you've got temperatures, again, that are much more constant and energy savings that are dramatic. When you're looking at the comparable cost between a geothermal heating and cooling system and a fossil fuel heating system with even decent efficiencies on your air conditioners, you're looking at savings potentially is up to 70% on oil and propane, a little less with gas, but still dramatically less operating costs with much less hassle and maintenance and other issues. Lots of people doing geothermal, all different size lots, whether it's a small lot, a large lot, fields. If you got a pond, it's a great way to do it, but all different kinds of buildings, no matter whether you're smaller or larger. Obviously, larger buildings require bigger and longer wells, but otherwise, it's everybody's doing it. And then my favorite example on the commercial side is this building. This building you may recognize because it is St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, world renowned. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, they were looking at the best way of replacing their aging heating and cooling system, and they realized that geothermal not only had lower capital costs, 40 40% less than the heating and cooling, traditional heating and cooling systems. But actually, by drilling 2,000 feet under St. Patrick's in Manhattan, even with all those incredible costs and all the challenges dealing with that, that produced 40% less capital costs and 30% annual energy savings. So the next time you go into Manhattan, you go near St. Patrick's Cathedral, perfect example of ground source or geothermal heating and cooling. Fascinating that actually even up in Canada and here all throughout the Northeast, you could take any building, new construction, and as you're building your new construction, you can drill holes under the footprint of that building, go down 500 feet with these closed loop wells, get that energy, and that energy from under the footprint of any building will support the heating, cooling, and hot water for up to 25 or even 30 stories. Unbelievable, right? So right under our feet, basically this incredible energy source that can save you a tremendous amount of money, heating, cooling, hot water for up to 25 or 30 stories. And then if you combine that with solar, as this project in New Paltz did, Zero Place in New Paltz, or as this affordable housing, 127 affordable housing units in the Rockaways did, by having solar supply the electricity for the building and then supply the electricity for the geothermal heating and cooling system, by combining these both technologies, what you have is the ability to eliminate all your heating, cooling, electricity costs, hot water as well. And in Beach Dreams too, it was air conditioning. That's $10 a month for the average apartment compared to over $100 a month for comparable apartments elsewhere in the Rockaways in New York City. And the heating cost was dramatically less than even the cost of natural gas. To give you another example, this is a partner of mine, Buffalo Geothermal Heating in Matrix New World. And when they took a look at a 400-unit building, what they found is when you take a look at the upfront capital costs, putting in a natural gas system, which you can't do in most parts of Westchester, of course. But if you took a look at what that cost would normally be, basically comes out to be about starting at 13 million, going down to 12.6 with the tax benefits. When you take a look at the geothermal system, absolutely, it's going to cost you more upfront. But because you don't have to have a cooling tower, because you don't have to have some of the utility operating costs and the different pieces there, because of the utility incentives, and those utility incentives, by the way, have gone up dramatically, and we'll talk about that in a moment, because you get a 10% federal tax credit, plus you get accelerated depreciation on the remainder that's there, what happens is that that $19 million initial cost gets reduced to down to under $10 million. And all of a sudden you're in the black on your upfront capital cost. And then you take a look at the cost to operate these systems, and you take a look at the cost for the power and the fuel and the water and the cooling towers and the electricity and the maintenance from doing a natural gas system. And that's about $600,000 a year. And with a geothermal system, almost half that. So dramatic savings that are there for anyone that's especially in new construction. And clearly, if you're a commercial new construction, you're looking to do this, it's an opportunity that really you shouldn't pass up. All right, the third area of electricity, of energy, is electric vehicles or transportation. And so, you know, it took the world like a long time to get to electric vehicles, but if you've been paying attention at all to some of the news, GM, Ford, all these manufacturers moving to get 100% electric vehicles into their fleet by certain target dates, states requiring new cars to be all electric by certain dates across the country, basically, and across the world. This is happening all over where everyone is moving forward with electric vehicles. And if you take a look at the growth, it's been really unbelievable. It's been exponential, and it took the world almost 20 years to reach the first million electric vehicles in 2016. By 2017, that went up to 1 million a year, 18, 2 million a year. Now we're at basically 6 million electric vehicles per year being sold around the world. This is a trend that's happening. It's not stopping. It's only growing faster. And it's not just Tesla. For those of you who are only familiar with some of the vehicles out there right now, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, has a Drive Clean rebate where they have over 40 electric vehicle models that get incentives up to $2,000 per model. And it's everyone and pretty much every manufacturer and no matter who your favorite brand is, what kind of vehicle that you drive, you can almost certainly find an electric vehicle that manufacturer now offers. And we're just going to keep seeing more and more and more of these hit the road as time goes along. And it's not just cars. You take a look, we've got the Ford Mustang, so high end for those of you who liked your Mustang and those vehicles. And I've seen that vehicle. It's actually come out. It's on the market now. GMC has this Hummer electric vehicles. Ford has an E-Transit electric commercial van that's just hit the road as well. And Amazon ordered 100,000 of these electric trucks for their last mile delivery all throughout the United States, which is pretty incredible. And you're going to see more and more of these across the whole planet. And as we look, why are people doing this? Because one, they're now cheaper to buy. When you take a look at the state and utility incentives, you take a look at the discounts being offered, you take a look at the tax credits, they're cheaper to buy to a comparable gas vehicle almost head to head. They're cheaper to drive. Instead of gas at $3 a gallon, you're looking at the equivalent with an electric vehicle, even in Con Ed territory of under $2 a gallon. Everywhere else around the state and the country, it's less than $1 a gallon in comparable miles. And what you look at is the fact that you can save money on fuel, and then they're cheaper to maintain. With an electric vehicle, an all-electric vehicle, there's no oil changes, no transmission fluid, less than 20 moving parts compared to 2,000 in an internal combustion engine. So much less to go wrong and much easier to maintain. And that's why we're seeing across the country, places like New York City moving to make their entire fleet electric because it's the cheapest option. When they looked at their total cost to own it, to buy it, to own it and maintain it, and then run it with fuel, what they found is that even without the incentives, electric vehicles were the cheapest way, which is why New York City has over 2,000 electric vehicles in their fleets. And it's not just true for fleets, it's also true for regular consumers. Basically, as this little piece in Consumer Reports said, you don't have to get a half off coupon for gas when you got an electric vehicle. You're half off all the time. And actually, in most parts of the state, it's actually 2/3 off everywhere when you have an electric vehicle. So where do you charge? That's usually the question. And fascinating thing is that 98% of most people's daily trips are less than 50 miles. When you've got an electric vehicle and you plug it into a regular wall socket overnight in your garage or anybody's garage, what you find is that electric vehicle with that overnight charge can go 100 to 200 miles just from that regular electric socket. And if you plug it in overnight in Con Ed territory, Con Ed right now will pay you to charge during off-peak hours. So you'll actually make money by charging in Con Ed territory overnight and just having an electric vehicle and letting Con Ed basically pay for all your fuel. If you are a property owner, you can now get a grant as of today of $4,000 per port, or usually people put in a dual port so you can charge two vehicles at the same time. That $8,000 New York State grant is also complemented by New York State tax credits. And what you wind up doing is that if you have to run, if you can do this where you don't have to run any additional electricity, you can just mount it on a wall and you don't have to do a lot of electric work, you're in the black right from day one. Basically, the grant will cover all your installation as well as the equipment costs. If you need to run, there is a program now from the utilities called Power Ready, where the utility will help make that happen because the state has these goals. The utility has to help the state meet those goals, and they'll actually pay your client cash to help them run the power to wherever it is that they got to run it to get these charging stations in. So again, there's a way for you to at least have these charging stations pretty much for free, or to even make money on them if you set it up and do it right. Worth thinking about. When you take a look at these projects and these opportunities, basically there's everything on capital savings and tax credits that wind up producing returns of 10 to 30% on your investment, which is not bad. Or in many cases, you can do a no cash down and wind up with savings of at least 10% on whatever technology that you're doing and however you're doing it. And that's pretty much across the board for most of these technologies. All right, so what do you do? How do you start doing this? How do we make stuff happen, right? So one of the ways that we do these things is that first we analyze the opportunity, we take a look at the situation, we figure out how things are going, we figure out the current expenses, what the opportunity, new construction, upgrade, what are you doing, what are your goals? Then we strategize and we sit down with the clients and we basically figure out what's the right way to do this, what are the incentives, what are the tax credits, the financing, what are the technology options, how do you make sure they're going to be available and future-proof it, all the different locations, landscaping, references, warranties, all those kinds of things. And then we energize and basically we look at implementing all these different pieces in the ways that make the most sense for that particular client, whether it's a for-profit, a government, a nonprofit, whatever their tax situation is, whether they have capital, don't have capital, and then how do we make sure that they keep getting what they think they're getting and save money from day one. And all of that winds up being a way for them to have a very positive environmental impact while they save a lot of money. So if you think this stuff isn't happening fast enough, just to give a sense, folks have seen this slide if you've seen my presentations before. This was New York City over 100 years ago, 1900, basically all horse and buggies, one car. How long did it take until it was all cars and one horse and buggy? About 13 years. And when you take a look at the timetables we're on with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act and all the things that we have to do to basically create a healthy and safe environment for our future generations, our kids and grandkids, we've got pretty much about that same amount of time. And so this example to me shows that we've done it in the past, we can do it now, and all we have to do is decide that we want to do it and tap into this incredible opportunity that's here that can create vast amounts of jobs and opportunities and savings for ourselves and our clients. And whether you've got a new construction or a renovation, whether you can have 20,000 square feet of space and can do a solar lease, and whether or not you want to take a look at electric vehicle charging stations and getting that opportunity, there's a tremendous way and a piece to save money. Don't leave money on the table for your clients. Set them up for future savings and future opportunities. This is me.